it is traditional to start the study of a Upanishad with a recitation of the Shanti mantra. And this is what we're going to do this evening. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahe Tejasvina Vaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. This is the Shanti mantra at the outset of the Katha Upanishad, the meaning of which, very briefly, is that may we all progress together on this path of self-realization. May all our efforts bear fruit, and may the Divine be always pleased with our efforts. This summing up of the essence of the Shanti mantra, it sets the right tone for the study of this very deep Upanishad. It is one of the most ancient of the Upanishads, the Katha Upanishad, and the subject that it deals with is life and death. And it explores them from an esoteric and an exoteric point of view. It is a large Upanishad and really difficult to cover in a short session of 45 minutes. So what we're going to be doing is to experience some flavors of the Katha Upanishad. And these, I think, will give us an idea as to the depth of this particular Upanishad. And there is a lot of symbolism in the stories of the Upanishads. Many of them start with a story and then go on to the actual teachings. But the stories themselves are symbolic. And there is one such story in this one as well. So this Upanishad is not merely a philosophical treatise, but an exposition of the road that leads from death to immortality, or the way to release from the cycle of death and birth. Now one can look at it from the point of view of the actual physical death on to the next level of experience, or one can look at it from the point of view of being in the world and being detached from the world and experiencing, whilst being here in this world, that which is the ultimate. And we have examples of many great sages who have had these kinds of experiences while they were still here in the worldly sphere. The mystical death, which played an essential part in all the ancient rites of initiation, is in fact the gate through which must pass all who seek the light of wisdom. The French writer Eliphas Lévy describes death as the dissolution of imperfect combinations. It's an interesting way in which he puts this, referring to the eventual dissolution of the physical body. He further describes death as the fountain of immortality. Death entering that fountain on one side and youth coming out on the other side, referring to the process of reincarnation in one sense, but also in a deeper sense, the meaning being that the transformative process takes place in this journey of evolution. In these statements, the author refers to the impermanence of the physical body and the material life that is associated with it. But the soul or Atma is immortal. Obviously, these statements have exoteric as well as esoteric meanings, referring both to the physical as well as the spiritual aspects of life. There is a similar idea in the book of Khalil Gibran. Some of you may have read about Khalil Gibran. It's a book which he has written, The Prophet, and in which there is a very symbolic story of the Lord of Death coming to this world and looking for a willing human being who would be happy to accompany him on the onward journey. And the symbolism is very, very important here, because he approaches many people and most of them declined. We are not ready yet. There is a lot we have to accomplish. We have to raise our families. We have to do many things which we haven't accomplished as yet. So let us complete them, and then we will be ready to accompany you. Now, this is an interesting idea because it tells us about the human beings being attached to the material life. Interestingly enough, the Lord of Death moves from person to person to person and eventually comes to an ascetic sitting under a tree. And he says, "Are you willing to come with me?" "Who are you?" "I am Death." And he says, "Why have you taken so long? I've been waiting for you for so long. So come, let's go." This is an indication of the readiness of that particular person to tread the path of realization. And this kind of idea is found in many, many different traditions of the world. And in the famous dialogues of Plato, the great philosopher writes about the final moments in the life of his teacher Socrates. And I think we are all aware of the final moments and how he was given hemlock to drink, and he drank that, and very dispassionately describes to his disciples, Plato being one of them, of how the hemlock was spreading through his body and how gradually his legs were becoming numb and giving the time when he would be released from his body. But the interesting thing here is that he was not at all disturbed, absolutely calm, collected. And these are symbolisms of the kind of preparations a person must go through on the spiritual path. In the Katha Upanishad, a similar idea is explored. The story of young Nachiketa is similar in that he meets death as a friend. The story here again is a long one, but I aim to cut it very short because otherwise we will run out of time. But essentially, in a fit of anger, his father says, "I give you to death." There is a beautiful story behind it, and I recommend to those who want to read about the Katha Upanishad to see this particular story because it has a lot of meaning behind it. So there goes Nachiketa, the young son of a great sage, onto the house of the Lord of Death. Again, symbolism that we must bear in mind. And there he sits at the door of the Lord of Death and waits patiently for 3 days and 3 nights. 3 days, significant symbolism here of the preparation that one must make. A preparation, a state in which one is in a kind of vacuum. So, this is what happens with Nachiketa. And then after that, he is confronted by the Lord of Death, who asks him, "What are you doing here?" Because this is not yet your time. And he says, "My father has given me to you, so here I am." And there follows a dialogue, and the Lord of Death is pleased with him, gives him 3 boons and says, "Ask. You are a very noble child, and I would like to, because he was only a young person, I would like you to ask for 3 boons. So the first one he asks for is, may my father be pleased with me when I go back. Because the father had, been very angry with him. So the Lord says, so be it. And then he says, I want to know about this fire of knowledge. And this is the second part of his question, to know the higher worlds, to understand them. Leaving the world in which we all are, in the world of forms, to the higher levels of the mind, the higher mind, to understand the working of the field while still being here. And the Lord says, okay, I am going to teach you that science as well of the higher consciousness. And he teaches him that. And because of the earnestness with which this young disciple asks the Lord of Death these questions, he is very, very pleased and says, henceforth, anyone who seriously speaks about this knowledge and aspires to receive this knowledge, it is going to be said that he has the Nachiketa fire burning in him. Nachiketa was the name of the disciple. Nachiketa was the name of the main character in the Katha Upanishad. And we will see a dialogue between the two. The Lord of Death, symbolism again, it can be interpreted to mean the higher manas, the higher self, the self within us. The reference this morning in the Chandogya Upanishad about the cave in the heart, and to explore that cave in the heart to find out what exists there. So similar concepts will appear here in this Upanishad as well. And the young disciple was very pleased, and he came to his final question. I want to know what happens to the self, what happens to the Atma when a person dies. There are some who say he exists, some who say nothing exists after death. Will you enlighten me on this? And the Lord of Death, and as I said, you can look at it from very many points of view, this being a dialogue between the divine principle and the consciousness at the lower level, between man and God, between a guru and a disciple. Whichever way you look at it, you look at this dialogue from that point of view, because they will all be correct in their own individual ways. So he seeks an answer to that. And he says, I want to know whether the Atma exists or not. So the Lord of Death, Yam, wants to test him to see how serious he is. So he says, why are you asking for these very difficult questions? You're still a young man. I will give you anything else you want. I can give you kingdoms on earth. I can give you all the wealth that you may desire and all the pleasures which the senses desire. But this was a true aspirant. And he says, what use are these to me? For they are ephemeral. They are transient. Nothing ever is permanent in this world. So tempt me not with those things that I do not desire. I desire to know only that which I have asked you, and that is, what is the Atma, what happens to it, and the whole science related to that. And he was profoundly pleased. And then they followed this dialogue between the two, which is a truly revealing idea. on the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. There is this doubt about a man who has died, some saying that he exists, others that he exists no more. This I desire to know as thy disciple. This is exactly the words of the Upanishad translated. He already calls himself as a disciple of Yam. In the Indian tradition, Yam is also known as Dharmaraj. The word dharma means obviously is known. The word dharma is now quite well known to people. It is a very broadly meaning word, which indicates not only something which is righteous, but a greater meaning would probably be to describe dharma as being the order of things in the universe. So he is the holder of the dharma, and he says to him, I am well pleased with you, and I am going to teach you this knowledge. And then he explains to him the two things which are very essential and the foundation stone of the Katha Upanishad. And the words that are used in the Upanishad are Shreyas and preyas. These two are Sanskrit words. The word preyas means that which we all like, that which the senses like, which is the five senses and the world of senses in which we all exist. And we all crave for the satisfaction of the senses. And when our senses are satisfied, we feel a sense of happiness. So it will give you pleasure. So if it means that you want pleasures of the world, I will offer you the pleasures of the world. And the disciple very rightly asks the question, are they permanent? And the disciple's answer that he received from his teacher, no, they are not. Everything that is there in the manifested world must come to an end at some point of time. But enjoy it while you are there, for everyone else does that, so you might as well do the same. And he says, I have no interest in that, O Lord. I aspire only for that which is permanent. And then the Lord talks about Shreyas. And he says, in this world, people have these two choices, to follow the path of Shreyas or to follow the path of preyas. And most of the people, the Shreyas meaning, of course, I have to give first before I elaborate further, meaning that which is good for the soul, that which will take the soul on an evolutionary journey further on the path of enlightenment. And the choice is given to him. Either aspire for Shreyas or aspire for preyas. But I must warn you that the path of enlightenment is like a path with a razor's edge on which you have to tread. And Nachiketa, the young disciple, says, no matter, I still aspire for that. So Yam says, one is good, Shrey, while another is pleasant. These two serving divergent purposes as they do bind man. Good befalls him who accepts the preferable share among these two. He who selects the pleasurable, falls from the true end. Because then one is in a cycle of death and birth, eternally bound to the wheel of suffering, as the Buddha calls this existence. Yama explains that the actions of all living beings are motivated by the desire for happiness. They are prompted either by sense desires or those that are inspired by higher aspirations. in accordance with the motivations and the intensity of the desires will the karmic results be. Because the law of karma works in a very fine form, and the results can be felt in the physical, the higher levels of being, which is emotional, and the mental. The ignorant who live in the midst of darkness but fancy themselves to be wise and learned go round deluded in many crooked ways, as the blind that are being led by the blind. So this is a reference to those who achieve much by way of physical attainments in this world without considering the higher aspects of life, and consider themselves to be very wise and very successful in many ways. And they are like the blind that are being led by the blind. The reference here being that such people then lead others to the path of blindness. The comparison used here is so clear that this has become a proverbial stanza. It is often used in criticizing the Pandits who pass themselves off as very learned and take upon themselves the duties of guiding society or the community. Now, the word Pandit is a Sanskrit word again, and I'm sure you may have heard about this word, but it means a learned person, a person who has read the scriptures. So, book learning on its own is not adequate according to the deeper esoteric teachings unless a real transformatory process takes place in a human being. So, there are in the present world, as well as one sees from time to time, these fake teachers of mankind who mislead men. And this is a reference to that kind of thing. And there is a similar statement in the Holy Bible. If the blind lead the blind, both fall into the ditch. Now this was in Matthew. The Lord states further, the way to the hereafter is not apparent to the ignorant man, who is childish, be fooled by the glamour of wealth. This is the world, there is no other, he thinks. Thus he falls again and again under my sway, that is death's sway. That's what he says. So you find people who will say, well, this is the only existence that we are going to ever have. So might as well do the best we can in enjoying. One who is totally absorbed in the worldly life, seeking worldly wealth and pleasures, will not have the time or the inclination to consider the higher purpose of life. Yam considers such materialists as childish as they do not understand the true objectives of human life. The great teacher Adi Shankaracharya states in his Bhaj Govindam, again I recite the Sanskrit, Punarapi Janmam, Punarapi Maranam, Punarapi Janani Jatare Shayanam, Iha Sansare Bahudustare, Kripaya Pare, Pahi Murare, Bhaj Govindam, Bhaj Govindam. This is a deeply mystical stanza which Adi Shankaracharya, the Shankar, the great teacher of mankind, taught to people. And the meaning of this is, again birth, again death, and again lying in the mother's womb. This sansar, or this process of life, process is very hard to cross ever. So one who is caught up in this cycle of death and birth goes on eternal incarnation to incarnation. And because there is no effort, every life there is suffering, and more suffering, and this process goes on and on and on. Save me, Murare, that is what the disciple who is awakened, he says to Krishna, through thy infinite kindness. So, it is something that suggests the idea here being the cycle of death and birth in which the world and the soul individually is trapped. The teacher advises the disciple, Nachiketa, that he, the self of whom many are not able even to hear, whom many even when they hear of him do not comprehend. Wonderful is a man when found who is able to teach the self. Wonderful is he who comprehends the self when taught by an able teacher. So to find a teacher who can teach the self is rare. To find a disciple who is ready to listen to him is also very rare. And those who are in that kind of situation are wonderful people. It is generally an accepted principle in all the Indian schools of philosophy that the higher themes of transcendental contemplation are prescribed only for a select few who have come up to the required level of evolutionary progress. This knowledge of Brahma Vidya is, however, not restricted, but requires progress on the path to attain it. It does not suggest that anyone is stopped from learning about it. Just like, for instance, in the Theosophical Society, we have all been exposed to many, many ideas about life, the laws of karma, the laws of reincarnation, and the whole evolutionary journey. But yet, only a few are attracted to come to learn about the teachings. Many others would probably say, all this is talk, talk, talk. Let us continue with what we are doing in our worldly lives. So, the aspirant who truly, where the light has begun to shine within the heart, will seek the path and then come on to a teacher who will help him understand. So Yam continues further with his teaching, states that the wise meditate on the self within that is difficult to be seen, the self that is hidden in the cave of the heart, and renounces joy and sorrow. So, first reference here to the self in the cave of the heart. Commencing from this verse starts a discussion on the technique for self-perfection, the teaching of Adhyatma Yoga. Adhyatma Yoga meaning the path, the yoga of learning the higher knowledge. The Vedas teach that in the cave of the heart is a seat of true intelligence. Therefore, it is often said that the heart should rule over the head. For the average human being, caught up in the delusions and desires of the world, with their negativities, the self is indeed seated amidst miserable surroundings. So you can imagine the self within all of us, because after all, the reality, the divine reality, is everywhere in this universe. There is nowhere where it is not. So when the individual is involved in his worldly actions and in delusions, the self is surrounded by the negativities of the worldly life. This spiritual instruction teaches that the reality can only be perceived by meditation on the inner self. There is a very similar reference in the Bhagavad Gita in the 6th chapter, the chapter on meditation, where Krishna says to Arjuna, let the higher self guide you. And when the higher self, the voice of the higher self is listened to, then the higher self is a friend of the lower self. But when the lower self finds the voice of the higher as not acceptable, or rather rejects that voice, then the higher self becomes an enemy of the lower self, because the lower is still caught up in the world of Maya and still wants to continue in this world of Maya. And as such, the higher reasoning voice of the higher self is rejected. So, ideas in the same way, that which thou seest as other than virtue and vice, as right and wrong, as other than cause and effect, as other than the past and the future, tell me that. Now, this is an interesting way in which Nachiketa, the young disciple, asks his question. Other than virtue and vice. So he is climbing up beyond the world of dualities. Rag and Dvesh in Sanskrit, the likes and dislikes. To go beyond that, to that world of non-duality, other than the past and the future, other than cause and effect. So where do you have the world of no cause and no effect? It is a higher world, where the karma has no sway. So tell me about that, referring to the Atmic field. When he refers to these pairs of opposites, Nachiketa is commenting on the world of duality, in which human beings are caught and suffer the pains and pleasures. Truth, or the ultimate reality, is non-dual or Advait, where these pairs of opposites do not exist, and it is this state about which he wants knowledge. Nachiketa is supremely confident about the scriptural knowledge, and he has already acquired, and therefore wants the Lord of Death to tell him about his own subjective experiences of truth. Now, the story of the Upanishad is that this young person, who was the son of a sage himself, was sent to the hermitage of another sage, where he learnt his spiritual sciences and then came back to his father. So he was already in the know about many things, indicating a preparation for the path. That word which all the Vedas declare, which all inward turnings sound forth, desiring which men lead the mystic life, that word is Om. So this is the first thing that the Lord of Death refers to. The starting point, so to speak, Om. With this verse, the perceptor starts his famous discourse that is the core of this Upanishad. The Lord of Death states that the way that is pointed out by the Vedas or Upanishads may be realized through the instrument which is the symbol Om, that is pregnant with deep meaning. In the Bhagavad Gita, a similar message is resonated with a similar idea, the efficacy of the recitation of the Omkar mantra. In the Holy Bible, in the Gospel of St. John, which I think we are all familiar with, the significance of the word is described. In the beginning, there was the Word was with God. You can see how, step by step, we are led to understand the truth. The Word was, beginning there was the Word was with God, the Word was God. The Word was with God, the Word was God. Proceeding further with this explanation, Yam advises the disciple, this word is verily Brahman. And it is the highest. And he who knows this word obtains verily whatever he desires. So, it is a meditation on the Omkar. In this verse, the Lord of Death explains the worship of the very symbol Om. This word indicates the supreme goal through its significance, and provides the meditator with a symbol of the supreme reality. The Atma, subtler than subtle, greater than the great. And in the Sanskrit again, the words used are Anor Aniyan, Mahito Mahiyan, meaning it is the smallest of small and it is the largest of large. In the Isha Upanishad, this idea has been explored in great detail, and an indication is given to us that even within an atom, the science of particle science will tell us about the movement of consciousness within the minute atomic particles and even the more minute electrons, neutrons, and protons within them. The Atma, subtler than the subtle, greater than the greatest, seated in the heart of each living being, he who is free from and willing and wishing with his mind and the senses composed. With his mind, intention in the mind to desire the higher aspects of life. And senses composed means the senses under control. Beholds the majesty of the self and becomes free from sorrow. Truth is described here as both the tiniest of the tiny and also the largest of the large. So one can say that that truth, that Parabrahman, is there in the minutest of the particles of this universe, and the principle of Brahman is also there in the mightiest of solar systems or the mightiest of galaxies, and the totality of existence is all pervaded by this principle of Brahman. Truth is described here as both the tiniest of the tiny and the largest of the large. This means that pure consciousness is an eternal, all-pervading essence, and that even the minutest space conceivable is pervaded by this great divine influence. Elaborating further on this reality, Yam says, sitting he goes far, lying he goes everywhere. Same concepts are again explained in the Isha Upanishad, which seems rather contradictory when you hear these words. Sitting, he goes far. Because if you understand consciousness being everywhere, pervading everywhere, then we can understand these ideas that have been explained in this manner. Lying, he goes everywhere. Who else, therefore, save myself, is able to comprehend the God who rejoices and rejoices not? Contradictory again, rejoices and rejoices not. In the words of the Mandukya Upanishad, this immutable principle is unthinkable and unspeakable. Now this is another one of the famous Upanishads in which this whole concept has been described as being unthinkable and immutable, and in fact there is another word which is also used, and that is unspeakable. The reason being that everything within this world, the three levels that we usually are connected with, is a world of limitation. So in the world of limitation, with the limited knowledge and the limited faculties that we have, it is difficult to explain that which belongs to the world of the limitless. Because any attempt to describe it is to thwart it. It is an all-pervading reality that does not have to move from one place to another. And in the ancient times, there are sages who said, neti, 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 meaning it is not this, it is not this, it is not this, it is beyond that. And there are others who would say, iti, 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 meaning it is this, it is this, it is this, because everything is within that consciousness which is the divine principle, the Brahman principle. Know the Atman as the Lord of the chariot. Now, this is where the example of the chariot comes, and we will find this also in the Bhagavad Gita. Know the Atman as the Lord of the chariot, the body as the chariot. Know the intellect as the charioteer, and the mind again as the reins. States the Upanishad. In the analogy of the chariot, the self is the master of the chariot. The pure discriminating intellect is the charioteer. The body of the individual is the chariot, and the reins with which the intellect guides the movements of the body are the mind. The senses, they say, are the horses, and the roads are the sense objects. The wise call him the enjoyer when he is united with the body. To move fast. The wise referred to in the verse are the self-realized sages. They declare that true entity is that seems to experience the joys and sorrows of life is not the Atman, the all-witnessing intelligence, but the conditioned Atma. The entity is conditioned by body and mind. So there is a reference here to the conditioned Atma and the unconditioned Atma, meaning consciousness that is in the world of Maya, the world of manifestation, which is the conditioned consciousness. So ideas like these have been explored, and the description here is given of the journey on which the intellect will experience many things of this nature, of the understanding of the truth of existence. Beyond the senses are the sense objects. Now, this is another description of the whole cycle of bondage in which one comes into bondage. And the teacher, having explained very much to Nachiketa, gives him a challenge. Arise, awake. Having reached the great teachers, learn, realize the Atman. Like the sharp edge of the razor is that path. Difficult to cross and hard to tread. Thus the wise say. Upanishads are the declaration of truth as experienced by the Upanishadic rishis in their profound meditations. So this was a clarion call he made to them. A life dedicated to perfect self-control and self-disciplined, a life of full awareness and constant discrimination is not easy to achieve. Continuing his discourse, the Lord of Death says to the disciple, he who has known that which is without sound, without touch, without form, without decay, without waste, eternal, without smell, without beginning, without end, beyond the Mahat or the Great, and unchanging, is freed from the jaws of death. It's an interesting way in which he describes that which is permanent, that which is eternal, because it is beyond the normal definitions of the worldly consciousness. In this verse, the teacher explains the true nature of the self in its absolute state of perfection, in the most indicative way possible to describe the ultimate reality. There is great difficulty in explaining that which is beyond words and beyond thoughts. So, as I said at the very outset, it is a tremendously profound Upanishad with much to understand and to absorb at the inner levels of our being. But to explore all those ideas within a short space of time is rather difficult, but one, I hope that we are able to create an interest in it and to eventually try and learn something about the profound teachings of the Upanishad, because it does refer to the eventual state and what happens to the individual self on realization, and the comparison between that which is a limited and that which is a limitless. So, friends, I think I have to. Another 5 minutes, okay? Thank you. Well, I've given an extra 5 minutes, so I can probably explore another idea here. The Brahman, the supreme reality in the macrocosmic aspect, and Hiranyagarbha in the intercosmic or microcosmic aspect is the Jeev. So there is a reference here, and some of these words you will find in the secret doctrine. Madame Blavatsky uses them. So the words used are samasti and vyasti. He who knows Brahman through both these aspects, which means the manifested Brahman as well as the unmanifested Brahman. Or in other words, the Sagun Brahman, the one with attributes, and the Nirgun Brahman, the one without attributes. These are the Sanskrit terms which are used, and samasti, meaning totality. So all these terms will indicate the kind of consciousness that we are talking about, and he who knows Brahman through both these aspects is a true knower of reality. And then there is a description as to what it is like. It is nityam, it is eternal, anadi, anantam, anadi, anantam meaning without beginning and without end, and dhruvam, which means immutable. Therefore, truth is beyond the cognition of the sense organs, the mind, and the intellect. And the teacher says further, who beholds him seated within the five elements, him who is born of tapas of Brahman, who was created before the waters, who entered the cave of the heart and dwells there, verily sees Brahman. There is a brief reference here to the process of creation when it initially took place, and the also the same in the microcosm. In the cave of the heart and dwells there, verily sees Brahman. This is verily that which thou has asked for. This verse has some reference to the process of creation. Brahman of the supreme reality in the macrocosmic or samasti aspect is Hiranyagarbha, and in the microcosmic Vyasti aspect is the Jeev or the individual consciousness, soul. He who knows Brahman through both these aspects is a true knower of reality. The verse says further, that this Brahman verse says that a seeker finally realizes the supreme reality, the eternal factor, both in the microcosm and in the macrocosm. Vyasti and samasti, Brahman appears as Jeev through the conditioning of Maya. So when that consciousness is conditioned by Maya, it becomes Jeev. And in the secret doctrine as well, in the three fundamental propositions, these ideas have been explored by Madame Blavatsky. And she says that when manifestation comes into being, what is the totality of existence or the Advait, indivisible life principle, appears to, not really, but it says it appears, there is a holographic perception of that one having multiplied into the many. So that is why it is called Maya. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. The world exists, So we cannot say that we are all illusions. We exist, but the world of forms is transient. It changes. Everything that is in the manifested world is in a constant state of flux. It keeps on changing. And it is therefore not permanent. It is not real in that sense. But the real is that which is unchangeable. When the conditioning drops off, the Hiranyagarbha and Jeev, they become identical with the transcendental Brahman. The word Hiranyagarbha is also explained in the secret doctrine. Hindu cosmology describes Hiranyagarbha as the golden egg or womb from which the universe was born. Helena Blavatsky also refers to Hiranyagarbha as the mundane egg, androgynous or non-dual, after which it was divided into the male and female principles. And these ideas are also explored in other literature as well. That person of the size of a thumb, the teacher says to the disciple, is like a flame without smoke, Lord of the past and future. He alone is even today and will be verily tomorrow. So I am going to stop here with these some concepts of the Katha Upanishad. Thank you.